Hello.
Hello, hello.
I think we can pause and start the recording. Do you want me to do that?
Yes, that would be great, Nick. Thank you.
All right. So welcome to all our attendees. This is our second webinar on the fast track to market for prospective applicants. We had a first webinar a few weeks ago, and that recording you can also find on our fast track to market website, and we'll share that website link on some of the upcoming slides. So my name is Annick Duché. I'm an innovation program manager at EIT Food, and I'm co-hosting with Adriano Pila, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, happy to. Hi, everyone. I'm Adriano Pila. I'm part of the innovation team here at EIT Food, working with Anik on our fast track to market program.
So yeah, we're happy to have you all here. Just maybe a first word on protocol, and then we'll get started. So we have an hour together today. We'll spend the first 30 minutes running through some of the most important highlights of the fast track to market. And we'll save, and even if we go faster than 30 minutes, we'll save most of our time for your questions. And any questions that we might not be able to answer live with you today, we'll be sure to post those on our website as well. And on our website, you can also already find an FAQ with some of the most common questions that we've received and the answers provided there. So I think we'll jump right in. Oh, and sorry, one last thing. This session is recorded, so you are giving your consent to have that recorded by attending today. Thank you. So I'm handing it over to Adriano for a question to the audience.
Yes, so thank you, Nick. Just like we did for our first Q&A and our first webinar, rather, we'll be using Slido as our polling and Q&A platform for today's session. So in order to participate in the Q&A, please scan the QR code that you see on the screen there. So you can join our presentation room where you'll be able to ask questions, upvote other questions that you may have as well, and overall participate in our presentations polls. We will also be showing this QR code throughout the presentation, so there's no issue if you can't scan it now. Alternatively, you may also join us at slido.com and entering the code 2762553 as shown in the screen. So our first question to you is, how did you hear about us? And we do this in order for us to learn how we're reaching you in terms of an audience, and how our communication efforts have proven useful to either reaching you via LinkedIn or an email or any other sort of communication methods I've been employing in the last few weeks for this call. I know we have some folks that have heard of us through some of our other programs, such as Food Accelerator Network, a few from the Impact Funding Framework, a few from emails and LinkedIn. So we would just love to kind of gather that data for a little bit. And we'll keep this up for just a few, maybe 20, 30 seconds or so. But I'm seeing a lot
I love
of
seeing email. Email is good because
yes,
it means
indeed.
our efforts have paid off.
Indeed. And it looks like the Slido functionality is working properly as well. So that's great. Awesome. I still see a few more people typing in, so we'll just give them a few more seconds. And I should say that the Slido platform can also be anonymous. So the answers to your polls will not be linked to your name. And on the Q&A, you have an option of include your name, but you can also ask questions anonymously as well. Okay, but I think we should be good here. Maybe we can go forward, and thank you all for your responses. Very, very helpful. So our agenda for today is we'll be spending a few minutes talking about who we are as an organization. We'll introduce the Fast Track to Market program itself. We'll be discussing how to apply and what is required of your application. Then we'll spend some minutes on the revenue-based financing mechanism that is embedded as part of this program. And then we'll also talk about how to submit your application. We also will devote as much time as possible at the end for Q&A, about 25, 30 minutes, so that we can answer the questions that you have, your burning questions. So without further ado, as an introduction, before we discuss the Fast Track to Market initiative, I'd like to first introduce what we do and who we are. So we are first a nonprofit organization. And as the name suggests, we are the world's largest and most dynamic food innovation community. And we aim to overcome food system challenges by accelerating and facilitating innovation in order to build a future fit food system that tackles the challenges that we're facing today, but also we know we'll face tomorrow. We do so through three main principles. First, we connect stakeholders across the entire food system, as we believe that collaboration is instrumental in generating new ideas across the entire food value chain. Next, we invest in projects and organizations, such as yourselves and startups, that share our goals and vision, focusing on delivering impact at speed and scale. And lastly, we also adopt an inclusive systems innovation approach, which means we believe that bringing along a diverse set of stakeholders is paramount to transforming the food system so that it can benefit everyone and not just the few. We execute against these three principles at a pan-European level, where we deploy regional teams to unlock innovation and create impact across the continent. As a result, we are structured around three main regions, recognizing that while transforming the food system requires an international approach, we know that the actual work of innovation is often very local, with farms, markets across the continent. To guide our thinking, we operate through a missions-based approach, where we've outlined three main priorities that we believe are critical to enable wide-scale transformation. First, we will make a material difference to the quality of life of our citizens, of European citizens, by enabling more consumers to have better access to healthier food, enabling healthier lives. Second, we will scale a systems approach that enables our food system to transition to sustainable and regenerative practices, enabling, as the name suggests, a net zero food system. And lastly, we will improve food security and safety for consumers everywhere by reducing risk and securing a fair and resilient food system. These are very important missions and is how we guide the projects and the funding that we allocate. And any fast track to market project should aim to advance one or multiple of these missions. So as an introduction, using our nifty little Slido platform, we're very curious to know what is currently preventing you as a startup from launching your product or your service on the market. We're really curious as well, what obstacles are your teams facing? And what has been your biggest pain point so far in your commercialization journey? And we'll just like we did prior, we'll keep this up for a few seconds here. I see a lot of funding answers, which is indeed interesting. I see reaching channels to market across territories. Yep, on-site testing and validation.
Yeah, we see a few regulatory hurdles, which is, yeah, very common.
Mm-hmm. And again, as a reminder, these are all anonymous. So we're just using this for our information to be able to better understand what are the pain points that the startups that we work with and are interested in funding are experiencing, so we can better adapt our instruments to your needs. Awesome. I think we should be good here. So I'll pass it to Anik. Thank you first for all the great responses. We'll use these as feedback and as additional points of data for us to inform how we should be thinking about some of the challenges that startups and SMEs experience when thinking about launching a product in the market. So Anik, I'll pass it back to you to talk about what is the fast track to market.
Yes, thanks so much, Adriano. So we covered this in our first webinar a little bit more in detail. So here we're just giving you a very succinct overview. So I also saw in the Slido earlier somebody asking exactly this question, if this opportunity is only for startups, and the answer is yes. However, we have specific eligibility criteria, which we're also going to cover now. So this fast track to market opportunity is intended for more mature startups who are already generating revenues. And that includes, of course, SMEs. And we also have specific requirements on the number of FTEs in the startups to qualify for this funding. And we also welcome applicants from our other EIT Food programs, such as the Rising Food Stars and the FAN program from our business creation team. What is this funding for? It's mainly intended to accelerate your commercialization plans, to have your product reach the market, and of course, addressed in our 3 EIT Food missions, as Adriano covered earlier in the presentation. So these should be innovative agri-food technology solutions. They could be products or services. So this is all delved into a little bit deeper in the guidelines, but we can also answer any questions you have about the scope of what we're looking for in the Q&A. So as the title indicates, this is a fast, accelerated funding opportunity. So we're looking at projects that are 6 to 10 months long. So that's a maximum duration of 10 months, for which you would receive anywhere between 60 and 400K of EIT Food funding. This is also not co-funded, so there is no co-funding required from your side, which is quite a nice benefit for you. And you can also apply for any funding within this bracket. So if you would like to request, 150K, 200K, 300K, all of that is valid for us, as long as it's justified in the types of activities that you want to use the funding for. That's what we're really looking to see in your applications. As we're going to delve into, there is a revenue-based return mechanism, which is percentage of revenue that is returned to EIT Food for this funding. So we're going to spend some time on that today and also answer your questions. And of course, very important is to submit your application by noon on April 10th at the indicated email here on the screen. So that's fasttrackcall@eitfood.eu. And we've got a link there to our website below. So next slide. So where we are in the timeline, I mentioned that we had a previous webinar on 21st of February. So that recording you can access on our website. It's also posted on YouTube. As I mentioned, the application deadline is April 10th. We will then jump right into our evaluation with a board of experts who will be reviewing your applications, as well as inviting you, if you make the evaluation threshold with the necessary score to pass, you would be then invited to a teleconference panel, which would be a chance for you to pitch your project to the panel of experts, followed by a live Q&A with the experts. And then we plan to communicate to the winners of the funding around, well, it should be exactly on the 22nd of May. And we would intend that you would start sometime in mid-June for your projects. Next slide, please. So now we will dive into the application process and also some of the eligibility criteria, which is what I mentioned before. So I'm going to run through these, and we do get a lot of questions about these, so we can spend time on that as well with you during this webinar. Feel free to, you can already start asking questions in the chat. So this funding is intended for a legally incorporated startup or SME, and it should be within the EU. It can also be a country associated with the EU. There is a link in the guidelines that lists which countries these are. I should also mention that we have received questions about the UK and Switzerland. There are special funding mechanisms for those, but they are eligible to apply, although there are some budget limitations for those countries. You should also have, of course, a technology, product, service, or solution that addresses one of our missions. So we do look at that critically in order for you to fit within the scope of EIT Food funding. You should have a minimum of 3 employees and a maximum of 49, as well as this maximum 10 million turnover requirement. So it's, of course, quite a large bracket there, but you need to fit into these requirements. Like I mentioned, yes, again, you should have a minimum of 3 full-time employees, and also proving that you are past the ideation phase, you are generating revenues already with paying customers. And so this is not a call for pilots and for testing. And we can also delve into that. Lastly, there is such a thing as providing a PIC number. This is something that is required from EIT Food for all of the types of fundings that we offer. So please check out this link. This is something that can sometimes be a little bit stressful just before the deadline, before you submit your application, if that's something you've not looked at yet. So please check that out if you're seriously considering to apply. Next slide.
Awesome. So in order to successfully submit your application, you must first download the application form Word document, which is found on our college website. And during your application, in addition to submitting the required Word document itself, you will also need to include the following documents and information in order for your application to be considered. So the first is a document about your company's presentation, which talks about its overall strategy, objectives, business model. This is so that our evaluators can understand your company's history and your experience in the market so far. The second section is about the product or service or solution in question that you want to fast track. And in this section, we like to see data and information about what makes that product unique, what is the unique selling proposition, what's the maturity of the business case, what's the product market fit, what are the key exploitable results, is there an intellectual property or patent related, and so on and so forth. The third piece is the company's commercialization strategy. So your overall portfolio of assets and products, and any analysis you have done regarding the markets that you're reaching or targeting, the customer segmentation, your TAM, which is the total addressable market, so on and so forth. And if you have any commercial traction or off-taker support as part of your commercial history and success. So those are what I would say the 3 main categories of information per se. The last 3 categories are more specific to ensure that you as a company is suitable to receive and your project is suitable to receive our funding. The first is the financial maturity of your company. So we like to see your company's financial statements of the past 2 years, plus any projections and assumptions for the next 4 years. And we'll get into why the next 4 years. And lastly, the last 2 sections is a project plan, which shows the timeline and the milestones and the work packages as part of the project that you will submit or the proposal you submit for this fast track funding opportunity. And the last one is a budget plan, which is a breakdown of the costs associated with this project and how you intend to use EIT Food funding to cover those costs. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Adriano. So now we're going to just spend a few minutes on the evaluation process and criteria. So as I mentioned, after you submit your proposal, a panel of evaluators will be assessing those proposals according to specific evaluation criteria that are listed in the call guidelines. And here we just want to give you a brief overview of what those are. So you see they're divided into these categories of excellence, your technology and market potential, your company's financial health, and the implementation and feasibility that you've presented in your proposal. So for example, I can give an example of each so you can better understand. In terms of excellence, this is really to assess whether your technology, the product or service that you're working on, is delivering a unique value proposition for EIT Food. And again, checking this fit with our EIT Food missions. As far as the technology and market potential, this is more looking at some of the documents Adriano just mentioned and just looking towards your specific realization plans, where you are, where you want to go, and also looking at that TRL level as well, and making sure that you're in that right phase that we're looking at for this fast track to market. In terms of the financial due diligence, that's quite straightforward, but it's really to verify that you're able to absorb our funding, that your company has already started generating revenues, so then you would really meet the requirements for this revenue-based financing that we will talk about in a few minutes. And then the implementation and feasibility, that's looking at whether you have demonstrated the potential and the skill set that you have already within your company, and that's not something that is then lacking, where you wouldn't be able then to carry through with all of these activities that you would be funded for. So if you pass this threshold that I was mentioning earlier, so the score, our threshold score is 3.5 out of 5, you would then be invited to attend a panel. And after the panel, you would then get a final assessment whether you've been accepted or rejected for the funding. Next slide, please. So just a quick word on how to submit your application. As I mentioned, the deadline is noon on April 10th. So Adriano has walked you through these documents. What we need is for you to make sure that everything is, all the attachments that are indicated in the application form are sent together in a zip file, and just make sure that the title of the email is this application submission for the 2024 Fast Track to Market. So just to specify here, the application is not done on a platform as you might have encountered if this is not your first time applying for EIT Food funding. So yeah, this is just a direct email with the documents attached. Next slide, please. So this is now the part where, so this is actually the last thing we want to share before we get into the Q&A. It's also where we want to spend some careful time with you on the RBF, revenue-based financing, because it's a little bit complex and we want to walk you through that. So next slide, please. So first of all, what is the revenue-based financing? So this is a founder-friendly type of financing where basically we as EIT Food provide your company with an immediate cash injection in exchange for a percentage of your company's future revenues. So first thing to emphasize is that the RBF is not based on the sales of this eventual product launch or revenues generated from that specific product or service that we are funding through the Fast Track to Market, but it's based on your company's overall revenue. And why are we asking for this? Well, first of all, this is something that you will encounter in any type of EIT Food funding opportunity. The RBF is specific to this Fast Track to Market, and essentially we're providing you with this advance payment, so to say, to de-risk your commercial investment through our funding. And we're doing this by asking you to also then reinvest in the EIT Food community so that we can then continue to pursue this work in the future as an agri-food community. So there are many benefits to the RBF compared to our competitors, like a traditional bank loan. I mean, in our first webinar, and since our first webinar, we've also received many questions about, why is this RBF perhaps more beneficial than a traditional bank loan, for example. And you can see here, as we've tried to summarize for you, many of the reasons why. So we can provide flexible repayments with you. This is something that we negotiate together when signing this RBF agreement. There are no extensive negotiations, no collateral or assets needed, no fees, no restrictions. It's also a performance-based repayment scheme, which we can get into with our example. So these are the basic premises of the RBF. Next slide, please. So some of the main things to know in addition to its benefits. So like I mentioned already, we're looking at a financial return based on the company's total revenues. We have the amount to be returned to EIT Food capped at a maximum of 150% of this grant awarded. And so this is based on the exact grant that you request. So if it's, like I mentioned earlier, 200K, 300K, we use that grant amount to calculate this maximum. And the amount decreases, of course, the faster that you would repay this return. It's also capped within a maximum of 4 years of completing the fast track. So this means from the end date of the funding that you have received from EIT Food, you would then have 4 years to repay this along the terms of the RBF agreement. Each repayment is equal to an agreed percentage of the company's revenues, and those amounts vary anywhere between 3 to 8%. And this is, again, a negotiation. So once you've been accepted to the fast track to market, we enter this phase of negotiation with this RBF according to mutually beneficial terms. And everything is clearly set out in an agreement, which is also a legally binding agreement. So when would you repay? This is something that we also decide whether you want that to be semi-annually or annually, and this is also clearly set out in the agreement. The last 2 points are, I'll maybe skim through those because I know we're already running out of time, but I already mentioned that this is a legally binding contract. So like any legally binding contract, if there is a breach, then this is subject to future legal recourse, which I know sounds, quite severe, but we have to mention it because these are legal terms. So we're going to finish now with an example from Adriano, and then we'll dive right into the Q&A. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Anik. Yes, I have one more slide regarding some of the information, but I think it's probably best if we go exactly to an example just to show our viewers how to visualize what this looks like in practice. So this example that we have is, let's say you are company A, and you are generating revenues of about 2 million euros per year. So 1 million euros every 6 months. And you apply for fast track, and you apply for 150,000 for a fast track to market project. Let's say company A receives this amount and is approved for this project. And as part of the negotiations, it agrees to repay EIT Food 7.5% of its revenues semi-annually, meaning every 6 months. So if we, and also we assume that the project, just for the sake of this example, is complete in January of year 1. So if we plot that out on a timeline, and we have 6 months, so January to June and July to December, we know that we have 1 million revenues for every 6 months. So because the company A agrees to repay 7.5% of its revenues, it'll pay back 75K per 6 months. So a total repaid amount by the end of December will be 150K. Now, it's important to note that even though company A has paid off the original principal of 150,000, it has not yet fulfilled the RBF obligation based on the multiplier amounts that we've outlined in the guidelines. The payment within 1 year is equal to 1.1 times the amount. So in this case, company A will need to pay back 165,000 within the first year. So as a result, it must go into the next 6 months of year 2. So as you can see, we have the same revenues for the January to June period of year 2. But because it's only paying up to the multiplier amount, which is a maximum amount, a cap, it only needs to pay back 30K to reach a total amount, a total repayment of 180K. At this point, because within the second year, the RBF multiplier is 1.2 times the principal, the obligation is done by the end of year 2. Now, we hope this example clarifies that even though you ask or you've been awarded 150,000 for a fast track to market project, the company A, based on the scheduling of its repayment, will actually need to return 180K by the middle of year 2. So it's important that even though by year 1, the company was able to pay back the original amount, it was not sufficient to meet the multiplier of 1.1. Now, this is so that we can incentivize early repayment. So companies that are selected for fast track to funding can actually choose to pay back larger amounts to decrease their multiplier and therefore be eligible or be liable for less return to EIT Food. Of course, if you have any examples or if you have any further questions, we can engage in the Q&A. And if you have additional questions about this example or anything about the RBF mechanism, feel free to email us at the email found on our website. Awesome. So I think, Anik, this is where we can transition to our Q&A section of our call. I see a few questions on Zoom, a few questions on Slido. So we'll just kind of go through them as we see. And I see that on Slido, we have a few questions that have been upvoted of people that I want to see answers that may be more relevant. So Anik, maybe the first question that I see here is, where can applicants find more information about UK eligibility?
Yes, there is. I'll maybe post in the chat the link. So there is in the eligibility section of the guidelines a link on Horizon Europe eligibility, and this has it has listed the specific agreement with the UK. But essentially, what that means is that the UK government is covering funding for the Horizon Europe funding that we provide through the fast track to market. So it's a specific funding mechanism, and it's probably best to read through this language. But actually, yeah, for that specific case, also email us because I can give you all the information by email, and I'll look for this link as we continue answering questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Anik. Another question that we see on Slido is, what was the application conversion rate last year? So for context, this call is actually based on a first pilot, an internal pilot that we did with EIT Food partners, startups partners. So the program looked quite different from our first installment. This is actually the first time we'll be running this program this year at this scale. So we unfortunately don't have the data or any information to share regarding the conversion rate or the success rate of applications for this program. Awesome. I see another question. Is there a minimum level of revenues that an applicant needs to have to be eligible? Maybe Anik, you can take this one.
There is not a minimum, but it should fit the requirement of being able to pay back these amounts based on the example that Adriano was just showing. So of course, based on your revenues generated, if it were just, for example, as a silly example, if it were just 10K, then you wouldn't be able to fulfill the requirements of the RBF. And so we do take that into consideration when evaluating your proposals.
Perfect. I see a few questions about the difference between this instrument and maybe a traditional debt financing or equity financing. So we need to be very clear here that this is a funding mechanism that has a return component to it. It is different than, let's say, a bank loan for a number of reasons, for a number of key differences. The first is that there are no personal guarantees or collateral required for this financing. Two is that the payment schedule is based on your revenues. So it is not fixed per se based on interest, based on the principal that you would receive from a bank. And the third is we are quite flexible and willing to negotiate with you an agreement that makes sense and that is feasible for both your company and your company's success, but also our risk profile and our ability to return our investment to be able to enable further food system transformation at EIT Food. You can think about it analogous to an interest rate, but there's a few differences that Anik mentioned at the beginning of our call that makes this quite interesting for startups, we believe, that may not have the same level of access to debt financing or other sorts of instruments out there in the market. I see one question, Anik. Will the evaluators who read the application be the same as those on the panel?
Yes, same people. And there are four evaluators, and they're also familiar with EIT Food. So yes, they will understand the full scope.
Perfect. I see one question here. We're looking to scale to new geographies. Are there restrictions on the target markets we're seeking to reach? Maybe Anik, is that one you can take as well?
Yeah, also because you're still with Slido, right?
Yes, indeed.
Because I see also a question in the chat about whether the product, so similar in terms of the geography. So the product or service should be intended for the European market, and that is European Union countries. And so we get a lot of questions as to whether the product could be sold in other markets like Africa, US, Asia. And the answer to that question is yes, that's completely fine, but as long it would have to first and foremost be addressed in a European market. So you could have that in another market, but it would first need to be within the EU.
Right. And the impact needs to be felt with European citizens, right? In the European continent, indeed. I see a few more questions about the mechanism, which is totally understandable and expected. So anonymous question asks, if I understood correctly, the repayment is based on the company's revenue, but will not exceed 150% on the funding amount. Yes, that is correct. So depending on the funding amount you request, you will be, the obligation will be a maximum of 150% of the funding amount. This is not 150% of the amount. So meaning if you request 100,000, the max you will pay is 150,000. So it is not, it's 10% or 50% based on 4 years rather than 150% over 4 years. I hope that clarifies. Anik, we have another question here. Do the 3 full-time employees need to be employed formally by the company? We work with several freelancers on projects, and the total FTE equivalent is above 3.
Right. Yeah, I saw that question. The answer is unfortunately yes. We are quite strict about this. We're going to look at, based on the learnings of this first deadline, because we do intend to do this again a little bit later this year, just to see if we might change that a little bit, make it easier for some folks to apply in the future. But really for this deadline, we have to stick to this FTE requirement. So it should be formal employment, yes. And we do know that this makes your lives quite difficult for some of you, so we apologize. But there are, reasons behind why we need to provide this.
I see a few questions on whether it will be possible to access the presentation later or the materials. So we are recording the session and we'll be uploading to the call's website where you will be able to access this recording afterwards for your own purposes. We answered those questions. Maybe Anik, one question that we see here, kind of related. One is there any funding delays, and how long is the decision cycle?
That's a really good question. Yes, because this fast track to market funding is contracted in any same way that any EIT food funding would be. So if you are already familiar with that or have had that experience, we do have to go through a formal what we call a grant, EIT food grant agreement, which is really your agreement to receive this funding and to be also bound by those obligations. And so that's a legal agreement to be signed. And it's specific to the amount of funding you would receive for this fast track to market. Usually, so like I said in our timeline there, that around mid-June, you'd be able to start those activities. What that means is you could, so if the contracting takes a little bit longer and it tends to, I for sure can tell you that sometimes these can be delayed for some weeks. We do encourage our grantees to start right away anyway, because those costs that you incur are then eligible for reimbursement as you proceed. So, for example, in this case, if we would like you to ideally start in mid-June, you could start incurring costs from mid-June and receive that pre-financing once the contracting is signed. I hope that makes sense. This is very, bureaucratic, but that's essentially how we work.
I see one question here. If an applicant fast tracks a product, or rather the percentage that is tied to the revenue-based financing agreement, what if you fast track products to a different market? Will it be based on the revenue from the new market? So the revenue is based on your company's revenue, not on the product or other service in question. So this is as a result. This is for the purpose of de-risking your commercial investment using our funding, but in return, we ask that we use the revenue from your entire company as a de-risk method for us. I see one question: will the project be done in partnership or consortiums? And maybe you can answer this quick one.
Yeah, I should have mentioned in the presentation, this is a single, so mono beneficiary loan essentially. So that's just for one single startup per project. So this is not a consortium opportunity.
Awesome. We see one question: do you provide templates for parts 1 through 3 of the application? Are there templates available from other tracks like EIT Food? So we unfortunately don't have any specific templates, but these are pretty standard materials as expected from startups and SMEs who seek funding from other sources anyways. So in terms of a company presentation, in terms of a document outlining a product's features, unique selling proposition, what is your go-to-market strategy and your commercialization plan and your analysis of the total addressable market. These are resources you can most likely find online, but if you have any additional questions, feel free to email us and we can see if we can assist you. Awesome. I see a few additional questions about Switzerland. Maybe Anik, maybe it would be worthwhile to just give a quick overview of what is the status of Swiss-based entities.
And it's okay. Yes, because we also got a question about this last week in our email. So it's the same link that I provided earlier in the chat on the Horizon Europe eligibility. The case for Switzerland is that it's a non-associated country at the moment that doesn't have an agreement with Horizon Europe. And that means that essentially you can still apply, but you are limited by a threshold of 60K of funding. So that's essentially the situation for Switzerland. So we still welcome your application. If you think these 60K would be beneficial, then please, we encourage you to apply.
Yes. I see one question: if an applicant is not yet generating revenues, but we're no longer in pilot stage, can we still apply? So you as part of our eligibility criteria, we ask that applicants are already generating revenues. We have a target value of around 100K, although it will depend on the forecast and your application. But yes, this call is reserved for startups and SMEs that are already generating revenues and already have commercial success in some way or another in the market. Perfect. I'm just going through, we're getting a lot of questions. So maybe one quick comment is if you feel like any of the questions or any of the contents today that we presented didn't satisfy or suffice your question, feel free to email us and we'll do our best to get back to you before the application deadline. Maybe a quick question here in the project plan section, it states that the project must last between 6 to 10 months. Yes, that is correct. As the name suggests, we are funding activities and projects that aim to see their impact complete within the 6 to 10 month timeframe. Anik, we have an interesting question here. Maybe we might need to take this one offline, but is the first mission, healthier lives through food, only for human food, or can products intended for animal feed be included?
So we typically would not include animal food, but yeah, that's something that we have to confirm with our leadership. Because yeah, so far that's the direction we've taken up until now, but we do probably want to just triple check to make sure that that's correct.
Yep. And maybe a quick clarification, feed and animal feed is most likely included. It's probably part of the net
yes,
zero.
I'm sorry, yes. Mm-hmm.
But pet food is something that we'll probably need to confirm. So feel free to email us and we'll get back to you on that. Awesome. Still a good number of questions. I see the template question. We already, one of the questions, do you have any restrictions of funding according to the company's average turnover? Anik, do you want to take this one?
Any restrictions? I say it again, I'm sorry.
So we have a question regarding, do we have any restrictions according to the company's average turnover?
Yeah, this is, I think, similar to this threshold question that we got earlier. So the answer is no. Mm-mm.
Yeah. We do have an eligibility requirement that your turnover or your balance sheet must be less than
yes.
10 million.
Yes.
But indeed, but your yearly revenues or your turnover, we on the guidelines we have a goal, but of course that'll depend on your application and your appetite for EIT food funding. Maybe one question, Anik, have you supported or received any edible insect protein companies?
I believe we have, but that's still something we would welcome as an application, yes. So it's not because we funded something similar before. I mean, we would not double fund in terms of if it were, let's say, the exact same product, which I don't think it would be. But if it's in a similar area, that's not a restriction for us.
We have a question about reporting. Maybe Anik, you can take this one as well.
Mm-hmm. Where is it?
There's a
trying
question.
To see actually where you are in the
I'm going back and forth
questions.
Yes, we do have a good number of them. One question that we have is, can you tell us a little bit more about reporting and the reporting requirements?
Oh, I see it now. Yes, from Marcus. So yes, the EIT Food reporting cycle is yearly. It's usually in February and March, and what we require a narrative style report as well as specific deliverables, and these are also mentioned in the call guidelines. So you would then provide evidence and also narrative style reports for those deliverables and submit them to us within our annual reporting cycle, which is typically in February of any given year. And these are, of course, mandatory requirements.
Awesome. I see a question here on Slido. Can we renegotiate the terms of repayment based on the project outcome, i.e. originally on a 2-year repayment, then we increase to 5 years? That would be up to your contract with EIT Food. That is probably a legal question that we'll have to answer offline. So feel free to email us. But I believe what we want to incentivize is probably earlier repayment. So if you're planning to repay within 3 years and your cash flow and your financing situation is more favorable with payment within 2 years, we're welcome to have that. But for other exceptions and other circumstances based on renegotiations, that's probably a case-by-case basis. I see one question, Anik, are there any restrictions of what the funding can be used for? For instance,
Yeah, we have
purchase of
received that
land.
question. So the answer there, the best way to answer this question is because we don't have specific restrictions per se, but I would encourage you to please check the scope section of the call guidelines where we describe what kinds of activities we want to support. And I can give you really quick a few examples. So we're talking about post-trial completion, consumer marketing, sales development, merchandising, trade advertising. So we're trying to give some examples, and this is section 2 of the call guidelines, because essentially what we're trying to not fund is like a still a testing or ideation phase, and this is why we emphasize that we want you to be past that.
Awesome. A quick question, is it 3 full-time employees or full-time equivalents? I believe this is a restriction of 3 full-time employees.
Employees, yeah.
Excellent. One question, Anik, maybe know the answer to this one. So when we think about the impact and alignment with our missions, how do we ensure that this impact is felt in the EU as something, for example, food security is likely something that applies to non-EU suppliers?
Yeah, I understand the question in terms of food security. Yeah, that I can't answer because it would be then specific to your customer in this case. But in terms of the impact reached, specifically in the fast track to market, what we would eventually want to see is the product launched on the market or the revenue that is generated. And typically that's done through understanding, who you're selling the product to. Who are these consumers? That's usually evidenced by invoices or proofs of sale. And so that's the way we would know whether that entity that you've sold the product to is an EU entity.
Awesome.
Maybe this is something we can delve into further if you would like to email us if that's not enough.
Great. I see one question here. What are your main KPIs apart from the 3 EIT pillars, I'm assuming missions, for choosing or rejecting a project? Is it about viability of the project so you recoup your investment on the loan? So on our guidelines, we have a section regarding how we evaluate projects. A part of it is indeed the financial maturity of your company in order to absorb our funding, but also your ability to repay your obligation. But it's also your alignment with our missions, and it's also the excellence and the market potential of your product and or service and its ability to generate commercial success. So regarding what do we look for in applications, you may find that in our guidelines in the section and how we grade those accordingly. I see one question, where can we see a list of projects which have been previously funded? So unfortunately, because our last installment of this funding instrument was an internal project, we don't have the data to share publicly regarding those projects. This is our first time running this program at the scale externally. I should say though, that if your company is maybe not ready or not eligible yet for this call, we're also planning on hosting multiple submission windows for this program. And our next window, we're planning to be October of this year. So if you're not eligible or if you're not ready for this specific window, you can wait until the second half of this year to apply.
I'm
Maybe one,
answering some, just so you know, I'm answering some questions directly,
I see,
just to,
perfect.
because I know we're gonna run out of time, so.
Yes, indeed. And that's maybe a good call out because we only have 2 minutes left and we still have a good number of questions open. What I recommend is if you feel like we haven't been able to answer your questions, what we'll do is we'll first put the recording of this webinar on our webpage so you can access it later. We will also be updating our FAQs with some of the questions we received today. And the third option is you can also email us at fasttrackcall@EIT Food if you believe that we weren't able to answer your question or if you have a specific case that you like some input on. We will do our best to answer you before the deadline, of course. We can't guarantee an immediate response, but we'll do our best to assist you and to answer any of your questions. Maybe Anik, since we are running out of time, we can do just a quick closeout. And with that said, we can, of course, as I mentioned, update our FAQs and offer ourselves available to answer any questions offline on our email inbox.
Yes, absolutely. Please email us, and we really want to encourage you to apply. This is a great opportunity, and we're also here to support you. So we're really happy with the turnout today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, and excited to see your application for the Fast Track to Market program.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.